Hey, what's up? It's Orion with Avant Samples. Today we're going to be checking out the remake I did of Way Back by Skrillex, Trippie Redd, and Pink Pantheress. Going over a bit of drum processing and layering of leads and like sub sound design and a little bit of mix and mastering. So let's get into it. One last thing, forgot to add, you can download this project file from the link in the description. So here we are on the project file, and let's take a listen to what mine sounds like.
Today, I really got to know my feelings very well. When someone mentions love, it's got to do with you.
And then switching it over to the original.
Today, I really got to know my feelings very well. When someone mentions love, it's got to do with you.
Back
It's
to mine.
just a Sunday night, I'm round at my address. You need to give me time for me to let my purse. I got to meet you just when you know who you are. You start to look around the place and then things fall apart.
So it is pretty dang close. The song is very, very simple. It's very good songwriting, and the acapella, it carries it a lot, especially Pink Pantheress being an amazing vocalist. So here I just ripped it from his TikTok. He posted it just pure acapella.
Today, I really got to know.
I'm just using reduced ambience and fresh air to try to bring life back into the super compressed version.
Today, I really got to know my feelings very well.
Just
When
cleans that
someone
up a
mentions
bit.
love, it's got to do with you.
And then the biggest thing people want in this is the main pluck. So this is actually two Serum presets that I made. They're very, very similar to each other. This first one that we have is kind of like a lower, more rumbly version of like a pluck. It's more of a tail to the sound. That's what I'm mainly using it for. And then we have the top layer being more the attacky pluck. So with the first one, oscillator A is analog BD sine with the phase turned all the way down to 0 and then random all the way turned down to 0. And the same thing goes for oscillator B, but they both have different wavetable positions. Oscillator A, it has more harmonics in the sound, and then oscillator B, same thing, but just it's not a true sine wave. It has a little bit of character to it, but it's still pretty just simple sine wave. And the reason why that these both have phase all the way at 0 degrees and random all the way down is because I'm layering it with another sine wave. So the second patch here also has phase 0 and random 0. And the problem when you start layering sine waves on top of sine waves and they're out of phase, they can start to cancel each other out. So here's not in phase. They're full opposite. And then once you put it back in phase, it just cleans it up a bit more. There is post-processing going on past this, which does kind of limit the phase cancellation if there is any. But when you do layer sounds like this, I recommend starting phase 0, random 0. If, say, like the zero crossings are not at phase 0. They usually are, but say that they're not. Or phase 180, right? 180 degrees. Say that they're not there. I would pick the 0 crossing where the sound starts to go up, because when it does that, it pushes air towards the listener instead of pulling it away, and it starts making it hit harder. Mainly stuff that are lower frequencies, because you actually start feeling it. You feel like pushed away by the sound instead of getting pulled into it. It's a weird thing to think about, but it definitely makes a difference. You can even hear the difference sometimes, especially on kicks. So the processing to these are very, very similar between the two. The lower one has a little bit more, has a different EQ, but all the processing post that is the same. So starting off with the chorus, and that's just there to add a little bit of width. And when I was listening to original, I could hear a little bit of width to the sound. So chorus is one way to add width. And then EQ, just cutting out the low frequencies. And this one, since I am FMing from a lower octave to get that higher octave in there with a little bit more harmonics, I'm cutting out that low root note that is being played alongside of this. Then OTT to beef up the sound at 50% and time all the way up. Another chorus, making it a little bit more wider again. And then this is where more harmonics come into this, because it's not just a sine wave in the sound. You could hear it almost making a chord. I'm taking MIDI from the MIDI that's playing through this. So you just open up the little triangle like you're doing sidechain in a compressor or something, and pick the track that it's on. And then it'll feed the root notes from here. When you turn on frequency and last, it'll feed the MIDI that is being played from that track, and it will play the corresponding notes inside of corpus. It'll resonate at that certain frequency. So the first one, I just have pitched up 19 semitones, so that is playing an octave higher and the perfect fifth to the original note that it's being played. And then we have a second corpus on top of that playing 3 octaves up. And same thing, just taking the MIDI input from this track, then you just mess with the decay time and stuff like that. Now, EQ, I'm pretty much just cutting out everything because it sounds like that. It didn't really sound like the original. Mainly the high end, but also the overtones weren't sounding too right. But once you cut it out, it sounds about right. G-clip, make sure nothing goes over 0, and I'm also adding some gain into it. And then Valhalla as the reverb. Adding some width to it, making it sound a little bit bigger. And then the top layer is pretty much the same. This one is playing 2 octaves up from root notes that the MIDI's playing, and I'm just doing that with a pitch MIDI effect inside of Ableton. This one, simple sine wave with a bit of a pitch bend on the master tune. And then I have a noise class lid being played through just to add a little bit of attack to it. EQ, same EQ as before. OTTs, same thing as before. Chorus, same reasoning. And then corpus again, I'm pretty sure these are the same presets as before. Looks about right. And then just opening up that filter, G-clip and Valhalla verb is a little bit less on the dry wet, I believe. Otherwise, it is the exact same. So together equals this. And one more thing on the more rumbly layer, the bottom layer. I have an EQ8 mid-side mode. Instead of stereo, you change it to mid-side. It was a little bit too wide in the low mid, so I'm just cutting out and removing some of the sides, some of the side frequencies. So width, you can tell, a whole lot wider. And then I'm just turning this down a couple, 4 dBs. This rack here is being processed, is getting kind of bus processed as well. Here I'm using a drum bus to add a little bit more harmonics into it and using it more for its transient feature instead of its compression and distortion. So definitely makes it louder. But also you hear that attack a little bit more just because of this transient here. And if you want more transient and less tail, you turn it to the left. If you want to keep the tail but still want the transient, you turn it to the right. Turning it to the left is really, really cool, especially on synths if you have something with a big long tail, but you can't really tweak it back to really tame it. I throw a drum bus on here and just turn it to the left and try to minimize any distortion that this might add by turning down the trim and turning on this comp thing here. Don't really know what it does, but I turn it on and it seems to work. And then EQ, bringing out some overtones, and once again cutting off any low end that might be added from the drum bus and distortion. And then a compressor just catching the peaks, and then it goes into a saturator catching the peaks as well. And then EQ catching any low end rumble that might be brought in by the saturation and compression, and then once again bringing up this overtone here. Cool, and that's the group processing for this. And the sound doesn't really sound too right unless a sub is layered underneath it. And the sub is just being made an operator. And For the sound design, it has character to the point of it feels like that's fading away and it's not just a full stagnant sub wall, so it's more plucky to match the pluckiness of the lead. I'm just using envelope on oscillator A to kind of make a little pluckiness with a bit of an attack to kind of also mimic the not so crazy attackiness of the main pluck, but also still have some attack to it. Slight pitch bend to add the attack as well. And then for distortion and other harmonics in the sound, inside the oscillator I drew in the second harmonic, and then I'm turning on the filter, turning off filter frequency key tracking, and turning that down with the PRD mode enabled. So that just adds a little bit more harmonics due to the filter circuitry. And then it doesn't have a lot of harmonics, so I'm just kind of rolling it off and trying to get rid of some of the clicks in here as well. And then saturator, just turning up the sound pretty much. And then I noticed that still had a little bit too much of the upper harmonics, so I'm taking out some with a little bell. So these two together sound like this. It really makes the sound feel way more full. Next up, we have the drums. And I'm only using drums from Avant Drum and Bass 01 here. So taking a kick 14, and processing it a bit. So I'm using a simpler because that's how I have my sidechain routed. I do it through MIDI. So it's just playing this one-shot mode, cutting off a little bit of the low end or a little bit of the tail to the kick. Boosting the bass so it gets distorted by the saturator a little bit more than everything else, and then that gets fed into SPL Attacker. So this is a transient shaping plugin, and it just adds attack to it. And it had a little bit too much high end, so I'm just doing some EQ, cutting out a little bit of the boxy frequencies and boosting the lows a little bit more. And then snare, quite a bit of work done to it. The snare in the original song, we didn't really have one in the pack, so I tried to modify one from the pack to sound like it. So here's the original sound. Good starting point, but not quite right. So distorting it with a saturator, and then SPL Attacker Plus again. Adding attack, and then shifter. I love doing this with claps and snares. You keep the high end, but you move the lower frequencies faster. And then EQ, I noticed it was almost boxy. It felt like something was getting hit with actual wood. So that comes from the 1K area, a little bit below 1K. So I'm really boosting that area and taking away some high end because I realized that the snare doesn't have that much high end in the original song. And then that goes into G clip to clip it and add some gain. And then that goes into Pro R to make it feel like it is in a room. And that's a snare. For the other percussion in this group, he has these pitched up snares. These ones aren't frequency pitched from what it sounded like. They're actually like pitched up with the pitch here inside. So the original one. And then there's another one in here that you can faintly hear. Just using another snare, and it's just pitched up a little bit. The snares in the original sounded very tonal, and that's why I picked these ones instead of just picking a random snare and trying to fix it. And then hats in here, it has the 16th note hat. That's very, very tight, but is also open, so it has a large attack to it, so I'm just doing multiple layers. This one's adding some highs. This one's adding some more highs, adding more resonance, giving it more character, and then a little like open hat to it, doing 16th notes. And then, oh, there's one more. Let's crash. So those 5 together. Pretty similar, but not quite. I really got to know my feelings very well when someone mentions love. I don't know. I think it just might be the mix. I'm not Skrillex, so. And then I just have a a break from the pack that I just only use for the high end to fill out some space up there. Cool, and that's pretty much it for that's pretty much the drop. I don't have access to original acapella, so I can't modify it and make it sound like it, or else I would show you how to do the full processing of vocals to make it sound like that. But there is a second area where it uses the same vocal that we have. Same processing as before, but I'm adding some distortion and making it sound like it's coming through a telephone. I'm using vinyl distortion as the second harmonic instead of adding the third like you would get from saturator and majority of saturation. Using that, kind of focusing the higher range and distorting that because that's the area that we're focusing this vocal in. And then I'm cutting everything below 400 and rolling off everything above 3.5K. That's where a lot of the sound comes from. And then reverb, and it's not like a true delay because it's full loudness for this area, so I ended up drawing in kind of a mock delay with the vocal repeating, and then the gain on the utility getting turned down, so it emulates a delay almost. And then it doesn't quite really have an auto pan on it because it's irregular the way that this pans it left and right. A little weird, it's interesting, some ear candy. That's what that sounds like. There's also some more variation in here. The melody then goes down an octave. This B here goes down an octave. I didn't really work on this part too much, but yeah. And then there's this section where it pitches down halfway through the note. I'm accomplishing that by taking a recording of the note being played here and recording it into a new audio channel. So take the output from track 3, post mixer, and then that is right there, and chop it where it pitches down, deactivate the original, and then unwarp it, pitch it down an octave by shift down arrow. And to get rid of some clicks, we just fade them together. There you go. That's what it sounds like. And then there's this section where it reverses. So I did the same thing, and I didn't want the reverse to interfere with any of the group processing on the pluck. I recorded it from 2 group, so I'll record out this A. This is just that, and then I press R and then line it up. Like that. Very simple, but can add in some nice variation. And then mastering, everything's just kind of mixed as I went and how it sounded, so just match the levels pretty much. But for master, so it is just a multi-band compressor, adding some balance into the mix and adding a bit of punch into the mix as well. So low end, just compressing it. On the peaks, -3, compressing it 3 dB, and then around like 0.5 to 1 dB constant gain reduction. And a little bit quicker on the attack to catch the peaks, and a fast release, so it doesn't really get bogged down by the big kick in this track. For the mid-range, I wanted the snare to be caught by the compressor, but also add some snappiness into the mix. A little bit slower of an attack, but still a fast release is what I'm doing here. So 4 dB of peak gain reduction, and that's mainly triggering from the snare in this. And then I'm just basically catching the peaks on the high end. And it just gives everything like a nice squeeze together, and adding punch where it needs it and balancing everything out. Without, you can hear that the snare's a little bit too loud, and the kick and sub aren't really joining together. Now everything feels more tight. And then that just goes into a G clip just for clipping it. And finally, like just chopping off any peaks. So you can see here in the light gray, that's everything that's getting chopped off that the compressor here didn't catch. Instead of doing this in a compressor, I like doing it with a G-clip. It's the more modern way of doing it. You don't get the pumping from a compressor, but you get loudness. So I think it's better on masters. And then finally, just adding the last bit of loudness with a Pro L.
I really got to know my feelings very well. When someone mentions love, it's got to do with you.
And that's Way Back by Skrillex, Pink Pantheress, and Trippie Redd. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty gosh damn close. So, cool. Hope you guys learned something from this, and catch you in the next one.